In today's exercise, we're going to be taking a look at Bootstrap, installing Bootstrap, and utilizing some of its basic features. We'll start the website for our wireframe grid to live on, and also play a little bit with installing jQuery and using some of the components. So the first thing that you're going to end up doing is going to getbootstrap.com and downloading Bootstrap. You can also link to this remotely through a content delivery network, so we'll look at some different ways of exploring that. We're also going to have to utilize jQuery as well, so we will install jQuery. And what we're going to utilize today, software-wise, is either Dreamweaver or some sort of code editor of your choice. I'll be using Brackets. It's a nice lightweight editor, and it will solve the purpose of just editing some code today. So that's the goal of today. So what I'll first do is download the Bootstrap files. I've already downloaded that, but once you download this, you'll save it to your downloads folder and then link to the files within your HTML document. And the first things first, we'll just kind of start a new document and go from there. So when I create my first folder, my first file, I'm just going to go ahead and give this the doc type of HTML, and then I'm going to open my HTML tags, set the language to English, and then close my HTML tags. And that's all I basically really need right now. So I'm just going to save this, and I will save it into my code workspace, Wk1 demo, and I'm going to name this index.html, which is the default HTML file for any type of home page or the main web page that you'll be setting up. So I'm going ahead and save that in there. And after that, what I'll do is just set up some basics. I'll create a head section, and I will also create a body section, just so we have that kind of ready for us to work with. So now that I have this saved, the next couple things, we'll add some more of the meta tags here, just so that we are all declared here in terms of what we need to declare for our meta tags. Go ahead and get that in there. And that's pretty much it for everything that we need to start this file. So once I have this set up, I'll just go ahead and type hello world, famous text here to make sure that our files are working correctly, and then I'll go ahead and open this in a browser, and I'll do that by going into my wireframes demo, and this is the file that I just saved, so I'll drag that into my web browser. It looks like it's working okay. I'm gonna actually get a new tab so I can drag that in here. Okay, so I've got this all set up. Just to go back to some reference in terms of what we're going to be doing, I'll open up the sketch that I had created. So this is, for example, maybe my wireframe that I'd like to be creating today. So we'll kind of keep that in mind. We'll try and design something that is similar enough to this as we progress through the exercise. And it's a good practice to kind of have this before you start, and of course you do have this from previous classes, so you'll have this roadmap before you start coding something that you don't really know what it's going to look like. So I've got that all squared away there. Now when we download Bootstrap, this is going to be the file that you get, Bootstrap, and then whatever version number after that. What is in here is a series of a couple different folders. So you'll see that you get a CSS folder, a fonts folder, and then JavaScript folder. In the CSS, you've got the actual Bootstrap CSS file, there's a theme, and then a minimized version, kind of a compressed version of that. Same thing with fonts. They come with a glyph font set, so you'll be able to utilize some glyphs or different icons or symbols if you should need to use that within your work. There's a JavaScript folder, which has the Bootstrap JavaScript for anything that's interactive, menus, scrollers, all that kind of more interactive JavaScript based stuff. You get that in there as well. So the first thing that we need to do is move these into our project folder and then link to these particular elements. So what I'll do is I'll just grab all three of these folders, And I'm working in this demo folder. You should probably name it something easy to recognize, maybe your last name, first name, or whatever project it is that you want to name it. That could be anywhere. That could be on your desktop. Maybe you have a folder that you're working in to keep everything organized, and that's probably the best way to do it. So currently I just have my index that I've created, and I've got my different Bootstrap folders here with their respective files within them. So the next thing that I need to do is go back to my brackets and actually link to these particular files. So if you'll remember from linking style sheets, I'll create some different links to these particular style sheets so that our HTML file knows we're going to be connecting to these particular style sheets that are created for us. So I'm going to go ahead and set my style sheet link CSS, and then I will get the Bootstrap. Okay, here it is, Bootstrap CSS, perfect. That's the first one that I want. And then I will also get the theme, which will also grab by doing the same thing, CSS, and then Bootstrap theme. So these are the two CSS files that we need to link to. And then we're also going to link to the jQuery as well as the JavaScript file for the Bootstrap. So down towards the end, what I'm going to do is right before the close of the body, we're going to put our JavaScript, and I'll just kind of space this out here. And I'm going to get script source equals JavaScript folder, Bootstrap.js, close that, close the script tag. So those are all of the three required Bootstrap files. We have two CSS files as well as the Bootstrap JavaScript. Now there is one other piece that we need, and that's jQuery. A lot of the JavaScript based functions of Bootstrap also require jQuery, so I'm going to grab that code as well. So the jQuery works the same way. You can actually download this, or you can do what's known as linking to a content delivery network. And I'm going to actually use a content delivery network this way so that you can kind of see both ways. So I'll go ahead and search for CDN, and it's not there. Let me see, maybe it's on the downloads folder. CDN, okay, perfect. So if you go to the downloads folder, you can go to a CDN. So these are all of the different content delivery networks that host the jQuery library. I like to go to Google. It seems to be pretty reliable, and they have a bunch of different libraries on here that we can link to in terms of using the content delivery network. So jQuery on the Google hosted libraries, these are the different versions. So we have 3, version 2, version 1. Here's the main site, all the different versions that they have. And I'm just going to go ahead and grab the 3 most recent version, which is 3.2.1 currently. So I can select this and copy this. You'll see that this is the code. I'll go ahead and go back to brackets and then paste this into my window. So this is a little bit different. Here we're linking locally to that file that we've downloaded. So that file must be in that folder. Wherever this JS folder is, it must be there. This above it, we're linking to a content delivery network, and this is, as you'll see, actually hosted on Google, googleapis.com. So we're linking to their version of jQuery, which is the same version, but they're hosting it. So if I'm working on a bunch of different websites, I don't have to download and place these files in 10 different folders. I can just link to that version on the internet, and usually you're pretty good to go. So we've got everything linked. The next thing that we can do is just kind of test some functionality here to make sure that certain things are working for us. So what I'll do is go back to the Bootstrap website and just kind of see if we can pull in some elements and familiarize yourself with what exactly Bootstrap can do for us. All right, so on the getbootstrap.com website, there are a lot of different pages and a lot of different content here to help you become familiar with Bootstrap. So just kind of looking through the home page, there's a couple official Bootstrap themes. There's some examples of sites that are built with Bootstrap. You can get some inspiration there to see what other people are doing. If you go to Getting Started, This will show you a couple different ways of how to download and get started with Bootstrap. So if you had wanted to use Bootstrap via their CDN, you can use these codes here for the CDN. This is the Max CDN, same thing that jQuery was suggesting we'd go to as well. So you can get these links to these particular documents this way instead of downloading them and linking to them locally. So try both ways, play around with it and see what you're more comfortable with. There's also some other options to download and install everything there. So this will go through and tell us everything that's in here, different ways of compiling stuff. Basically, disregard that stuff. That's all for different ways of downloading and packaging and including like creating your own Bootstrap. So here in the examples, you can see some different examples of starter templates, some Bootstrap themes, playing around with the grids. And it's a good practice to kind of familiarize yourself with all of these different pieces of content and features to us so that you know how to implement them within your own work. So go through, spend some time, maybe look at the grid page and you can kind of see how everything works here. It'll tell you what happens with the 3 equal columns, unequal columns, 2 columns. A lot of really good examples on here. So that's on the Getting Started page. CSS will show us a lot of the different CSS-based features. So you'll see the grid system is a really big, really key portion of this. Typography, showing different features in code, tables, forms, buttons, images, etc. Components, this is going to show us all of those different glyphs in that font. There are things such as drop downs in here, utilizing drop downs, different button groups, button drop downs, many different features that you get built into Bootstrap. So essentially all of these little elements you would have to code and program yourself had you wanted to use one of those without utilizing Bootstrap. So what Bootstrap is doing is it's giving us all of these different elements, whether they're in CSS or JavaScript, different components that we can utilize in our own code based on this web framework. So that's the real benefit of using something like Bootstrap. In JavaScript, you've got different transitions, modal windows, drop downs, tooltips, alerts, carousels, all types of good interactive JavaScript elements that you can utilize and play around with as well. So just to kind of try things out, let's just go ahead and do something very basic. And what I'll do is go to buttons. This is probably one of the easiest ways to see if it's working. I like to just kind of reference this. So what I'll do is I'll just grab this code, and what this is doing is this is saying that we're going to use a button class to style either a link or a button with this particular style. So I can make my href just to any page or any document or just nothing basically, and then style it as a button. So let's see if we can do that, and I'll just kind of paste this in below my hello world text, and we'll see if we're getting the proper stylization of the Bootstrap accordingly. So this is my page here. If I refresh, you can see that I did in fact get this link, and that just shows me that our CSS is linked properly, everything should be good to go with Bootstrap and all the other details that we've already incorporated. And what I'll be doing is just kind of going back and forth between my coding window as well as the browser. If I ever go back to this, I want to make sure that I'm, of course, saving my document. I'll just hit Command S to save this. And then once I'm in my web browser, I can Command R or refresh. That will hopefully refresh any changes that I've made to this particular document. So the first thing that I'm going to do is go back to my sketch, and we'll see that my sketch tells me I've got a navigation bar towards the top, I've got some sort of a feature graphic, some body text, and then a footer towards the bottom. So let's try and get the navigation in, and I'll go ahead and utilize one of the navigation systems from Bootstrap to show you how that might potentially work for you. So what we're going to do is go to the components, and we'll find on the right navs, nav bars, anything like this that we think we might be utilizing. I'll kind of go through this and see what kind of items or components I want to be using. So here I've found a nav bar, default navigation bar, that I'm going to utilize for my web page, and we'll put that on the top. So this tells us a little bit about what we need to have to run this, tells me some information about how to utilize it, and then it gives me the code. This shows me the example of all the different things that I can do with it. It has built-in drop downs. You can have a search form or a submit form in there. And this is essentially the code that's going to give me that navigation bar. So what you'll end up doing is potentially referencing this site, taking some of the code snippets and inputting it into your work, and then changing it to make sure that it works for your specific need for that particular component based on whatever different, for example, whatever different pages you have, whatever content you need to link to, you would do that through utilizing this particular method. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this navigation bar, and I'll just go ahead and grab this and copy it so that I have that for my brackets information here. And I'm going to put this right at the top of the body. I don't really need that text really kind of at all anymore, but I'm going to paste in the navigation, and you'll see that it pasted this whole humongous amount of text that's going to act as the navigation bar for the top of the site that I'm creating. So I'm going to save this and then go back to my page and refresh. And you can see now that I do have a menu here. I've got some interactivity with the drop down. I've got my submit box, different links. And of course you can customize any of this by going back in and customizing the typography or the code within the details here. So I'll just kind of look in here, and I don't really want a search bar, so I'll kind of go through here and find where that might be. And if I can find, I'll just find okay, here's a submit button. So this is going to be the form. I don't really want this form here, so I can delete that and then save. That should get rid of my form. And I can kind of go through this and manipulate what I want or don't want based on my, my page essentially. So I'll type in some different text here, links, I've got all of that stuff that I can change. Any of these things here, you're going to go in and you can change the link. So the anchor tag, just like any other anchor tag that you have, you would change that to be wherever that second page is that you want to potentially link to and make that connection to that page. You can use any of the drop downs, or maybe you delete the drop downs. Maybe you don't have any sub pages just quite yet. Maybe you just leave it to the kind of static links, and that's okay. So with this, we're starting to build this element, and one of the great things about this navigation now is that if I scroll in on my page, you can see that it's going to simplify at this particular breakpoint. So on a desktop, you might see the full width version of the navigation, versus on a tablet, you might go to this more of the hamburger button style menu, which opens the actual navigation this way. So you can see that this navigation is also responsive. Say, for example, I was on a mobile device, such as a cell phone. This is what that navigation would look like. So it's always a good practice to kind of get in the habit of adjusting your website width to see how it's being manipulated in terms of the different breakpoints, and kind of keep that in mind as you design and move forward with your content creation. So now that I have the navigation in place, let's once again reference the sketch and we'll see what we need to do. So we do need a kind of header area here that we can get some content in there, maybe some featured information to manipulate some of the grid structure. We'll start a grid structure for this area and get that content in there. So if I go to Bootstrap, let's take a look and see if we can find out where the grid component is. So I'll go to Grid System, and the grid system includes a responsive mobile-first fluid grid system that appropriately scales up to 12 columns. So your mockup that you have should be 12 columns at the same width of the template of Bootstrap already. So that's what we're going to be doing, is creating a grid structure. It says rows must be placed within a container. So what we're going to be doing is creating a div with the class of container, and that's going to act as the container for our grid. And then we're going to create different rows and then different columns essentially within those rows. So this tells us how we can specify different widths of columns. So you'll notice that, let's say for example on large devices, we're going to set it to column large. This is going to be based on an 1170 pixel grid, and each column is going to be about 97 pixels. If I want to set something to be a particular amount of columns on a medium device, that's going to be column medium, small, and then extra small, and that will tell you the amount of kind of width of those columns. So if I look at an example of some columns in a grid here, you can see that they're declaring 12 different columns, and on the medium setting, these divs are going to take up one column. So they're telling it, I want this div to take up one column wide, and they've got about 12 of those for this first row. So you can see they're opening a row. This closes the row, and then within that row, this first row here, they've got 12 different columns, and they're telling it, at medium-sized devices, I want these to be one column wide. So that's there. The next one, they've got 8 columns wide, and then a 4 column wide column. And they've got 3 columns that are each 4 grid spaces wide, and then 2 that are 6 columns wide. So you can see how they're declaring these columns and then what they look like in the actual grid system there. If you set the container to fluid, that's going to change the size up or down to fit the width of the div that it's within, or the web browser usually. So that's going to be more fluid. It's going to fit the size of the browser essentially. So you have some different options there as well. The great thing about this is, again, this is responsive. So you can see if I shrink this down, you can see that all of a sudden they collapse and kind of stack on one another. So content will be changing and shifting based on how we tell it to kind of resize and shift accordingly. So we're going to start this grid and play with some content in there. So the first thing that I need to do, as this suggests, is go ahead and open a div, a container div, and then potentially start a row or whatever else that we want to be in there. So right below my navigation, what I'm going to do is start my grid structure, and because we know our navigation is kind of squared away, I'm just going to close this so I know that my navigation is all contained within that. And now beneath this, what I need to do is start a div, and I need to have the class of container on this div, and anything that I put within this div is going to be a potential row or column within our grid structure. So I'll go ahead and give myself some space down there, and I'll leave some notes. I'll just say open main grid container, and then I'll go down here and say close main grid container. That way we know what we're doing and where our divs are kind of opening and closing. And now for that header section, I know that I've looked through this, and I want to go ahead and use what's known as a component. And Jumbotron is kind of a styled area that gives you a particular background color. It gives you a scalable size. It gives you the rounded corners. You can put any type of content, buttons, text, headings, anything in there that you want to kind of stand out essentially. So what I can do is go to the div class Jumbotron and then put whatever content that I want within there. So I'm going to make a new div with the Jumbotron class on it. So I'll do div class equals Jumbotron, close that, and then I'll just type, this is my Jumbotron main text, and I'll go ahead and put this in a paragraph tag. And I will also get, let's say we want H2, and then I'll say boats and more. It'd be my main text for the website. So I've got that in there. I'm going to save this, go back to my website, refresh it, and now you can see that I've got that Jumbotron area. I've got my headline text and some body text in there. And this also will kind of scale and resize based on the width of my particular browser. So you can see at the different breakpoints where it's jumping between large, medium, and small, and how that kind of interacts with that. So you'll notice that anything beneath it, this is not in that grid div. So that's just staying outside of the bounds of the column structure that we've created. So what I need to do is just kind of remove that. I don't really need that anymore. And I'm going to continue to build some of the main structure for my layout, which tells me next that I'll need 4 columns on this row, and then I'll need 2 columns on the following row. So let's try and build this grid structure based on the text that we're going to need. I can go ahead and remove some of this text here. I don't really need that anymore. Now within my grid container, beneath my Jumbotron text, as it's so conveniently called, I'm going to set up a 4-column grid. So what I need to do now is open a row, and I'm going to do that by typing div class equals row, add some space there, and now what I need are 4 columns, and we know that the entirety of the row is made up of 12 columns. So if I need 4 columns, I'm going to have them sized at three elements wide essentially, and we'll have 4 of those. So I can do that by typing div class equals column large 3, and this will give me 1 column, test column 1, and this is telling Bootstrap that at large device sizes, I want this column to take up three spaces wide, essentially. So I can make 4 of these in total. So I've got 4 of those in total, and this should, in theory, fall within the grid structure and be sized to equidistant spaces to create that second row. I'll go ahead and close. This is going to be called close second row, so that I know where that is. I'll go over here and refresh, and you can see, of course, I removed that text down towards the bottom, and now I have 4 different columns spaced to 3 spaces wide. So I'll go ahead and just kind of fill that with some text. And what I'll do is add a heading, and a paragraph. Content about the heading above. Even more epic text describing how amazing this site is. So I can take this content and I'm just going to replace these different areas, kind of being mindful of keeping my text and code kind of clean, easy to navigate, using my indents to my advantage, and refresh this. So now you get a more structured idea of what this content could potentially look like in that grid structure. So you see very clearly that I can have control over creating different divs and sizing them accordingly to place whatever content that I need in those different columns. If I shrink this, right here it's stacking because I haven't really declared anything for medium or small just quite yet. So it goes to the default and that's just kind of stacking on top of one another. But this looks kind of weird, so I think I can add a little bit more detail in there to define what that code looks like at different breakpoints. So just like we've added this first class of column large 3, I can add as many different classes as I'd like to this particular div based on the CSS. So I can also tell it that, let's say at medium size displays, I want this to be 6 columns wide. And then let's also say at extra small devices, I'll want it to be 12, or the full width of the screen essentially. And if I take this and I'm going to add this to the other areas as well, we'll see what it looks like at medium and of course smaller sizes as well now. So I refreshed my page. If I go to my first breakpoint, you can see that now it's giving that column 6 spaces wide at a medium device. So instead of automatically stacking, I've told it to allow that information to take up 6 columns wide at medium-sized devices. And then on extra small, that's when it gets to the single kind of stacking 12 column wide approach to that content. So referencing my graphic again, towards the bottom, we're going to do a little bit different. We're going to do kind of an offset grid, and we'll have one that's a little bit larger on the left, and then a little bit smaller on the left, and a little bit more text content on the right. So we have this row closed here, and I need to kind of tighten this up a little bit because I don't want to get confused. So I'm going to delete a little bit of this extra space here. And then I can open a new div. This again will have the class of row so that I know I'm opening a new div. This I'll say close third row, or whatever. If you want to say, image row or text row, something descriptive of what that text might be. Of course, that would be very helpful to utilize. So maybe get in the practice of doing that, maybe keeping a record of what's in there, leaving as much detail in the notes so that if somebody else picks up this project, they'll be able to determine what they're looking at. Code can be very personal sometimes, so leaving notes, especially even for yourself or other people, definitely helps out. Sometimes I'll forget things like, I don't know what I did in that code, and then I'll leave a note, oh, okay, that's what it is, especially if it's something that's really interactive like JavaScript or PHP or something that you might need a little bit of a reminder. So I've got this extra row, and let's go ahead and open a div. We'll make this column large 4, and let's say at medium-sized devices 4 as well. And then go ahead and close that div. And this one we're going to say this will be an image of a boat. And then we'll open another column to the right of this, and we'll just say div class equals column large 8. So I'm picking these numbers based on my layout and my grid. This will be just text on right. So I know that if I have a 4 column space on the left, I need to make up the balance of 12, which of course would be 8. So that will be my complete 12 column grid structure. I'll go ahead and open my trusty lorem ipsum document here, and I'll just grab some of this text. And I'm going to place this in my document. And that's actually some really beautiful lorem ipsum, but I think I'm going to actually make it that much more beautiful by adding some spacing and some paragraph tags to it. So I'm just kind of filling this with placeholder text for now. Of course, if you have the content already for this, you can go ahead and place your own content within these areas, but the main idea is we're just trying to kind of create the general structure of our wireframe to then go back and kind of plug in that information later on. So if I refresh this, you can see that I've got that 4 column grid here, space on the left, and then the 8 column grid on the right. And I'll just go ahead and grab an image of a boat or something to put in there. For now, let's just go ahead and place a just kind of a placeholder. And within this, what I'll do is go ahead and create a div. And I'll just put some inline styles on this so that we do this kind of quickly. But you can make a div within this set to 100%. And let's say we want the height to be, let's try 500 pixels, see how big that is. And then I'll just do background color, and I'll give this a nice kind of light gray background color. And that should give us a div that will be the width of our column. It will have some height to it to take up some space, and should have a background color applied to it. So this will in theory be about twice as much as I'd like it to be tall. So let's go ahead and edit that real quick. I can go back and just put, let's try 265 is probably a great number. Now I've refreshed it, so in theory that could be any type of image or graphic that we want to employ in that area. And now based on my sketch, what I have left is the footer area, and I'll kind of keep in mind, okay, I might need 2 columns for this, maybe one on the left, one on the right, and then we'll place that in there and continue to build out that footer. So now that I have some main content placed in my grid, I'm ready to close out my column structure and then work on the footer. So what I'll do is go to my code editor and find the bottom of everything where I'm closing my main grid container. And then what I'm going to do is open a footer tag. And then what we need to do in this footer is actually put another container so that we can have another grid system made up of as many different rows or columns as I would potentially need. So I'll go ahead and do that, and I'll go ahead and open my container, and I'll close this, and then I'll put close main footer container in my little note there. So we're good. And then I'll go ahead and add a class of a row, because we must open a row within the container. And then here I know that I'm going to need a 2-column based structure here, so I can make a series of columns, as many as I'd like, or I can make one really large one and then maybe one kind of smaller one off to the side. It just kind of depends on what kind of content that you plan to utilize in that particular area. So for this, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and open a div class, and I'll make a column at large screen sizes of 9 spaces wide. And then on this side, I'm going to put social media buttons and links. And then for the right side, what I'll do is go ahead and make another div class column at large screen sizes. I want it to be 3 columns wide. And then I'll put just a little thing over here, copyright, there we go, copyright boats and more, 2017, save. So I've saved it. Go over here and refresh, and you can see that I have my footer, but it's really close to the content of the page, and I can't really tell that it's any bit of a footer at all right now. So what I'll do is I'll add a little bit of style to this to kind of offset it a little bit, give it some information, some details to make it look more like a kind of a suitable footer. So I've only used inline styles at this point. What I'm going to do is create a external style sheet at this point, and then make sure that I link to it properly, and then I can kind of include all of my different style from there. So I'll go ahead and make a new file, and in this file I'll just kind of start creating some styles for my footer, which I know to be footer, and then I will go ahead and add some margin on the top. I'll add about 50 pixels. We'll probably need a little bit of padding on the top, and I'll make that 10 pixels. And let's add some height to it as well. Let's see what that gets us. And I'll add some background color to kind of separate it from the rest of the page as well. And I'm going to save this as CSS, and then I'll save it as styles.css. This will be my own style sheet. Remember, you can link to as many style sheets as you'd like. So essentially I'll be linking to a few different ones: the Bootstrap, the theme file, and then of course now my themes, my styles CSS. And I'll go ahead and link that up here in my head section so that I have it all organized. Style sheet, and then I will reference wherever my style sheet is, and that would be down towards the bottom. Go ahead and close that and save it. Go to my website, and now you can see by doing that, it added a little bit of that margin towards the top here to separate it from my content. It added a little bit of padding above this text so that there's some breathing space, and added the light gray background to our page. So at this point, I've got a pretty well wireframed out site that does have the responsive functionality based on the grid system that we've come up with. I've added the navigation and a little bit of a footer so that I can fill in all of that information down there towards the bottom. And from here on out, it just comes down to kind of plugging in the content, whatever this text might be, whatever the graphics might be, linking everything to secondary interior pages and different area of content. Remember, utilizing that grid structure to give us a good starting point definitely helps out. And the more thorough you are with that kind of pre-planning, it makes it really easy to actually build out that content within the web and within the code. So from here on out, I'll kind of go through and add just a couple little details here to play around with some images and links. One of the main things to remember is you may or may not use any of these elements. You might not use this navigation. You may have sketched out something that is very different or very unique to your particular need. You don't have to use these elements, but the main benefit of Bootstrap is, I think in my opinion, the grid. The grid is very helpful to be able to build this gridded column structure very quickly. Otherwise, I would have had to work on sizing these all individually, setting up different number widths or percentages. It gives you the responsive breakpoints automatically. So there's a lot that's built into utilizing a grid structure and system like this. So this is kind of what we're looking for the first week, is to build a grid structure based on Bootstrap to house the content of your site that you'll be plugging in the next couple of weeks. Let me know if you should have any questions or comments for me, and we'll go from there. I'm going to break the video here and then work on some additional elements after that. So from here on out, it's just a matter of inputting content such as your text, your images, linking everything together, and we're going to be using more HTML and CSS for that. If you need a refresher on any of those, you can be sure to visit lynda.com. They have really great tutorials for HTML and CSS, but also anywhere online such as W3 Schools, really nice reference material for anything HTML, JavaScript, PHP. There's a lot of different languages that they have referenced on there. So if you're ever stuck, feel free to utilize the web tool to your advantage and just kind of refresh your memory on it. And that's going to be very key in learning how to kind of develop websites, is being resourceful and solving problems on your own to kind of continue to grow and expand your knowledge of HTML and coding specifically. So what I'll do is I'll try and add some content here. I've got some images that I can add to just kind of dress it up a little bit. And I'll start with this background image for the Jumbotron. I'll grab a nice image to put in there, kind of work on the sizing and maybe work on the text a little bit to kind of fill it in a little bit more. So I know that the class here is Jumbotron, and I need to kind of style that a little bit. So I could add inline styles here, but I have my external style sheet. So I'll go ahead and target the Jumbotron class there. And then what I'll do is just set it to a certain height, and we'll get it to be about 400 pixels tall, and save that. And that should change it to a little bit taller, give it a little bit more height. So in my folder, I have my HTML, but I've also added some images, so we'll be able to kind of play around with some of the social media icons. I've got a boat background image, Facebook graphic, a sailboat, and then a Twitter icon. So what we'll be utilizing is the boat background JPEG, and I'm going to try and get this image in this background here. So I go back to my style sheet, and what I'll do is I'll just set this class of Jumbotron to have a background image, and I'm going to navigate to that by hopefully finding it in my images folder and boatbg.jpg. And actually, because I'm in my CSS folder, I need to back out one folder and add 2 dots instead of 3 there. So hopefully this should have the boat background loaded now. If I load that, you can see that I did in fact pull this boat background image in there, but unfortunately in my text, now you can't really see it, so I need to go back and kind of change that as well. So I'll go back to my style and make this white. Save and refresh. So I've got that in there. Let's go ahead and add, we can grab some more of my awesome filler text. I'll go ahead and put that in there as well. Let's see if that looks better. Okay. And let's add a little bit of a break before even break. Now we're looking good. Okay, so we've got the header section. I've got a graphic in there that kind of scales and gives me a nice little background there to play with. And that we've just done by basically styling the CSS. This could be anything. This could be an image. This could be text only. There could be buttons in here if I wanted to add one of those element buttons. It could be a scrolling carousel if you wanted to kind of implement a carousel image there. basically this is going to end up being whatever you've chosen to include in your sketches and wireframes and mockups from the previous classes. Let's see if we can get an image in this placeholder area down there towards the bottom. And this we know is the image area. Right now I just have that placeholder text. So let's go ahead and link my image by finding it in my images folder. And I'm going to get sailboat, and let's just close that and save it and load it and see what happens. So okay, this is a humongous image. The first thing to note here is that whenever you're saving images for web, you want to make sure that you save them of a decent size and quality, but you don't want them to be too large in terms of the file size to where they're going to weigh your site down or cause it to take a very long time to load. So in theory, I could potentially scale this down quite a bit and still be okay. But the bigger issue here is that it doesn't really fit inside my column. So I need to figure out how to get this image to work within this layout. You'll also see that it doesn't really manipulate within the grid. It just kind of sits there and it's humongous. We don't want that. So what I'm going to do is go back to my Bootstrap, and I'm going to go to the top, and I'm going to visit the CSS page, and I'm going to see what they say about images. So in Bootstrap 3, images can be made responsive friendly via the addition of the image responsive class. And what that will do is apply a max width of 100, height of auto, and a display of block. This way it scales nicely to the parent element. So I don't have to code all that stuff somewhere. That's already built into the Bootstrap code itself. All I need to do is add the class of image responsive. So let's go ahead and go to my brackets file, and now I'm going to go ahead and add a class, and I'm going to call that image responsive. And I think they had a dash in there. Yes, they did have a dash in there. So I'm going to save this, go back to my page and refresh. And now you can see that the width 100% scaled it to the width of the column, as well as the height kind of adjusted that accordingly so it's scaled properly. If I start to break this down, you can see at the different breakpoints how it's going to be reacting to the particular information and content of the grid around it. So you can see that now that image is also responsive. There's just one last thing that we're going to do, and that is add some of the social media buttons down here towards the bottom. And instead of having this text, what I'll do is place that in there. So I'll actually use an SVG, which is going to be a scalable vector graphic. We can use those on the web without any loss of quality if they're sizing up or down. So I can actually add a object, and I'll go ahead and do type. I'm going to add an image type. This will be SVG XML, and then my data will actually be where this image is housed, and that's going to be, let's start with the Facebook.svg, and let's see if we can get this to work. So let me load this, and again, same thing. It's there, all right. It's a little bit humongous, so what I need to do now is just kind of style this, and I can put a class on this and call it social media icons, or I can just do a quick inline style, and I'll set the width to about 30 pixels and refresh and see if that worked. So that worked out okay. That's a pretty good size for this. So then now that I have that, I can just copy this and paste it a few times, and then we know that we're going to have Behance, and I think we said we also have a Twitter in here. So I'll go ahead and update this to say Twitter, save, refresh, and now we have a series of 3 little social media icons down towards the bottom. If you'd like to get any of these icons or graphics, you can search free social media icons of all things. This is actually going to be a link that has free social media icons on it. I'll include a link to that in the details. And then what that does is it downloaded a series of the social media icons in pings, EPS, all types of different formats that you can kind of select from. So there are resources out there for different elements. Of course, you can certainly make your own as well if you'd like to kind of customize them based on your needs. That might be a great opportunity depending on what sort of style you need those buttons to be. So we've added some images, we've played around with some of the responsive text. From here, again, you're just going to be kind of completing this by inputting your actual copy, linking to different pages, and building out the site based on the requirements, wireframes, and all of the content that you've already created. Again, I hope this helps to give you a nice intro level discussion of Bootstrap. Again, familiarize yourself with the documentation on the website. There are many features here, and we've really only scratched the surface. So just kind of spend some time scrolling around, learn more about what it can do, look at the different components, and just kind of experiment, play around, and have fun. Hope you guys enjoy yourself. Let me know if you guys run into any issues or have any questions, and I'll talk to you all soon. Thank you.